Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The small town lay still in the wake of its most eventful annual celebration, St. Patrick's Day. Every year on the anniversary of the saint's death, all the local residents from miles around fill the square and line the streets clad in their tackiest emerald attire. Children with tinsel antennae sit atop red-faced fathers as they strain to steady their children. Dogs bark excitedly in little top hats while groups of women in green tutus drink shamrock shakes and wave flags. Only the finest local businesses and school groups participate in the parade, such as Mixed Timber Supplies and Septic Tanks, Inc., often participating with themes like Under the Sea and Vikings. The residents at the local retirement home where I work never bother with the theme. They choose to dress as members of Toy Story or Mexicans Against Trump and wave as they are slowly driven past on a flatbed truck. I love those guys. At most parades, someone will dress up as St. Patty himself and walk around holding up a fake snake in victory. The man wasn't even Irish, my granddad used to say. He was a retired historian and hated St. Patrick's Day. He would tell me tales of Celtic times, of warriors and scholars, mages and druids, or local legends of ancient tombs and fairy hills, while I sat next to him munching fig rolls. He made it seem like the world was full of magic until St. Patrick came and did away with it all. He'd still come along to see the parade with my parents and me, but he'd grumble about it afterwards, saying, "That man was the beginning of the end." I could still hear the music and laughter from the pub at the bottom of the hill. I'd spent most of the evening there with some old school friends. I'd almost gotten into an argument after shouting, "Salancha, to the death of St. Patrick!" to my friends, gleaning a dozen angry glares from nearby locals while they muttered to each other beneath their frowns and orange wigs. The group of us afloat in a heaving sea of late-night revelers also dressed in shades of green, but I'd had enough for one night. "Aaron, turn it down," Neve had said while tugging at my shirt for me to sit. "You're always getting us into trouble," she said, frowning. "So what? I'm pro-pagan," I protested with a smile, but the others just looked mortified. After that, I decided it was time to leave. My foot stuck to an ice cream wrapper, snapping me out of my thoughts. I groaned as I steadied myself against a windowsill and peeled it off the sole of my shoe using the tips of my nails. "Ugh, gross," I said to the empty road. Glancing around me, the main street looked suitably trashed. The tricolor bunting along the lampposts lay limp and torn in the breeze. Flags stood at odd angles from dark windows while the street was littered with discarded hairbands, plastic flags, bottles, glasses, and a smorgasbord of other festive detritus. The light from the street lamps bathed my way in a nicotine-stained glow, giving the filthy scene a surreal quality. The cold air smelled of wood smoke and stale Guinness as I pulled my coat tighter around my neck. "Ugh, I should have just stayed in the pub," I muttered as I strode on towards home. I lived a healthy walk outside of town. I wouldn't usually go on foot, but the taxis on Patty's Day are like gold at the end of a rainbow. They don't exist. I cut across the deserted square and was about to cross the road when a blur of color got my attention. Through an archway, on the far side of the square, was an old cobbled lane leading down to the park. Halfway down the lane, a figure stood in a shaft of yellow light. A man wearing a leprechaun mask, one of those whole head ones with a cheap orange wig, a furry green top hat, and a full rubber face. This one looked mangled on one side, like it had been melted into a twisted smirk. I stared back for an eternal split second, hoping I'd only caught him about to take a piss. I'd seen half a dozen of them at the parade earlier that day. But he just stood there, broad shoulders and fists clenched in a silhouette, the light catching his fake grinning face. His eyes were empty black sockets. My insides turned to ice as my mind played a montage of vintage Jason Voorhees in my head. Real helpful, brain. Thanks for that. I slowly started to walk away. Damn it. I hope I'm a final girl, I thought, never taking my eyes off him. He hadn't moved. Just as he was out of sight, I speed-walked across the square and up a side road toward the safety of home. I still had a while to go before I'd get there. I zigzagged across several streets and broke into a jog until my lungs burned enough for me to stop. I walked to the edge of the street where the town met the countryside and decided to take a shortcut through the fields. I was probably being paranoid. I'd always felt safe in this town, but I'd watched too many slashers and didn't want to star in one. Growing up here, you get to know all the best places for sneaking around unseen. I glanced behind me and saw nothing. I ducked through a familiar gap in the hedgerow, allowing the branches to comb through my hair as I went. Out here, I only had moonlight to guide me, bathing the grassland in treetops in shades of silver, like walking through an Ansel Adams photo. I could have used my phone, but still feeling spooked, I kept it in my pocket. Although on familiar ground, I still felt exposed walking through the middle of the long field. My jeans started to suck up the moisture from the damp grass while I repeatedly checked behind me. Still no followers. I could hear the usual sway of the trees and the distant mournful cry from a fox, but nothing more. Phew, I let out a sigh. Nearly at the next field, and I'm almost home. Peeking through the next row of bushes, there were no flashing lights or loud laughter, just an empty field. There's a huge flat stone in the center where all the local teenagers meet up to get drunk. I hoped there might be a few here tonight, but I needed more time. I emerged from the bushes into the gray meadow. The gap was smaller and the branches clawed at my hair and clothes as if trying to drag me back. Just as I'd extracted myself not so gracefully, I heard the distant rustle of something moving through the bushes in the field behind me. I glanced back through the gaps in the branches, my pupils dilating as I searched the murk. There it was, a flash of orange. Fuck, I whispered to the dark. I backed away, searching between the fauna for another flash of dreaded orange. I started moving faster as the adrenaline pumped my heart into panic mode. Now trotting backward, I turned, ready to pelt into a full sprint when something met my foot and went flying ahead. As I stumbled and the ground rose up to meet my face, how far away was he? I cried out involuntarily and looked up from my tangle in the grass. It was a fox, a bright orange fox. Its head had smashed against the rock after I kicked it. From the splatter of crimson on the stone and the stillness of its body, I could safely assume it was dead. I kicked a fox, and now it's dead. What kind of person kicks a fox? The question cycled in my mind as I dragged myself to my feet, my knees and lips stinging from the fall. I tasted the iron tang of blood and touched my lip tentatively. Yep, split. I limped over to the poor fox. It was still. I'm so sorry, I said to him. Suddenly feeling overwhelmingly sad, I slumped on the stone next to it. I always liked sitting on this stone. There's a comfortable dip in the center like it was made as a seat, even if it's always cold. I could feel my lips starting to swell as I tongued the fresh wound. My whole front was soaked from the grass, and my knees felt weak. Diving deeper into my self-pity, I hardly noticed the movement behind me at first. A great end to Patty's Day. A twig snapped, and I wrenched my head around to see the leprechaun man standing a few feet behind me. His warped rubber smile leered at me in the gray light, framed with that cheap bath mat wig and dirty shamrock top hat. The rest of him wore ordinary faded jeans and a worn brown jacket. A gold cross glittered on his chest. Look, I don't know what you want, but I'm sorry if I offended you, and I'll just be heading home now. I don't want any trouble, I stammered as I stood up on unsteady feet. I started to back away while searching my pockets for my phone. Empty. It must have fallen out when I tripped, but I daren't break my gaze with him to look around me. As a defense, I found my keys and stuck them between my fingers. He cocked his head and took a step forward. "Feck off!" I yelled, brandishing my key-shaped knuckle duster in his direction. "What do you want?" "Back off!" I said, waving it around maniacally. I took another step back and felt a crunch under my left foot before it slipped out from under me and I fell hard on my ass. Well, at least I found my phone. I could see the now concave screen had completely cracked as it lay in the grass at my feet. Great. The leprechaun started to laugh. He threw his head back enough for me to see the stubble on his neck as he cackled at the sky, holding his sides. I continued to back up on my sore backside when I heard an undertone beneath the laughter. Another sound. My heart was thumping so hard in my ears that it was hard to decipher, but it was growing louder. It sounded like slithering. like something hollow and wet sliding around itself. Just then, I noticed a slight movement in the fox. For a moment I thought I'd been mistaken and it was still alive, but it wasn't moving right. Something was wrong. The fox's jaw widened slightly as a fat red worm wriggled itself into the open air. It stuck out from the gaping muzzle, shining scarlet in the moonlight. I was transfixed. There was something vaguely familiar about how it moved, but I couldn't figure it out. The worm felt around its new surroundings and grew larger, still sticking out from the row of teeth. The leprechaun bastard was recovering from his fit of laughter and couldn't see the fox from the far side of the great stone. I stared as the fat worm felt around the edge of the jaw, tipping its head off each tooth in a row. As it stretched to touch the grass, another appeared, and then another, until 8 chubby worm heads were visible. They moved strangely in unison. Each worked in tandem with the other as they felt around. Then, like a group of synchronized swimmers, they each curled over a portion of the open jaw and began to open it wider and wider. The whole dance had only lasted several seconds, but I was mesmerized by this gross yet strangely hypnotic sight. Part of me had totally forgotten about the psycho carrot top over there. He had stopped laughing and was probably annoyed I wasn't giving him my full attention. I could see him advancing in my peripheral vision, but I couldn't take my eyes off the fox. The carcass was moving with the widening of its maw. The 8 worms had opened it up like setting a bear trap. The fox's teeth stuck upright like little bright stones in the gloom. The chubby worms strained against the sides as the masked man came closer. I could feel the tension in their little red bodies as they tore the jaw wider apart, leaving a wide open void in the center of the carcass at the base of the stone. The worms released their grasp on the jaw and began to slide outward. The wet, slithering sound returned as their heads touched the grass. It seemed they were attached to something inside the void. Another 2 fatter worms appeared on either side, quickly followed by... It was then I realized the familiarity of the worms' movements. They weren't worms at all. They were fingers. My brain couldn't compute what I had been watching. The gnarled, false-faced man had made it to my side of the stone by the time I tore my eyes away from the unreal sight in front of me. I looked at his distorted face, and back to the fox. He followed my stare. "What the f-" he bellowed in fright and leapt back in surprise. The sounds of slithering and squelching made my stomach revolve in disgust as a wet head started to emerge. 2 gore-covered arms stretched out of the dilating abyss, grabbing tufts of grass in a blood-slick grasp, then shoulders, then a blood-soaked torso of a man birthed itself from the still too small gap. His face was obscured by long bloody hair which clung to him like sinew as he clawed his way into reality. My midnight stalker sputtered loudly and lifted the bottom of his stupid mask, enough for a torrent of vomit to erupt onto the grass beside him. This strange delivery was apparently more than his stomach could handle. The stench of cider and bile lingered in the air as he stood bent over, swaying slightly. The only sounds were his wheezy gasps and the sucking noise as the man dragged his feet out of the now decimated remains of the fox. Steam rose from his skin in the soft light as unknown viscera dripped onto the silver grass. The ancient man slowly rose to his feet. He was tall, broad, and completely naked. As the blood slid down his body, it revealed a galaxy of small Celtic symbols tattooed all over him. He parted his slick hair like curtains, revealing a stern, bearded face with heavy, dark eyebrows. The whites of his eyes glowed menacingly against the dark, blood-stained face. He looked straight at my would-be attacker, who whimpered audibly. The gore-covered man took one step forward as the guy who still hadn't removed the mask took out a box cutter from his pocket and slashed it at the air in front of him. "A box cutter?" I used the term men loosely. "So that's what you were going to do to me?" I shouted incredulously, despite the bizarre play being acted out between the 2 men. Another swipe as he started to back away. I heard a soft chuckle from the naked man. Swipe, swipe. The naked man kept striding confidently towards the masked slasher and grasped his arm on the 5th slash, bending it back at an awful angle until it snapped at the elbow with a loud crack. The sound echoed around the field and down the valley. The leprechaun shrieked in pain and fell to his knees, but the naked man chuckled again. He grabbed him by the scruff and dragged him on his back as if he weighed nothing towards the stone. He began to shriek again, flailing his legs and one good arm in a futile attempt to free himself. He dragged the man across the stone like a bascule at a guillotine, leaving his head hanging over the dead fox at the comfortable dip where I'd sat so many times before. The relict man looked down upon him and put a hand out to lightly grasp the gold chain around his neck. He held the tiny gold cross in his hand before letting it drop again. As I watched in the shadow of the hedges, he plucked a large claw from his hair, then sliced the leprechaun down the belly in a flash. The man screamed, then gurgled, and finally fell silent. I could feel a slight change in pressure around me, and my ears popped when he cracked the ribcage open across the stone as if about to perform a ritual autopsy. Only then did he look over at me. Our eyes met, and I knew he wouldn't kill me. I had summoned him. He smiled. I got up and walked over to the splayed corpse on the rock, and trails dripping down like streamers, and organs thrown haphazardly on the grass. He took my hand, and I never felt so calm. We both looked down into the growing chasm deep in the masked man's ribcage and into another world. The ebony depths looked so inviting. I looked him in the eyes once more and stepped inside.
Corpus Christi Caller Times, Corpus Christi, Texas, December 30, 2020. The mysterious artifact that doesn't exist, but everyone is still looking for, by Ben Reed. Those in the know refer to it as the item. Supposedly, this secret item is worth untold riches, can cure cancer, or make the Detroit Lions win one Super Bowl in their miserable existence. Joking, of course. Nothing can get the Lions to win. But this artifact, or item, slowly transcends from a small group of modern-day Indiana Jones explorer to the mainstream suburban adventure seeker. A true urban legend that has enthralled thousands. One of the thousands is Ms. Ella Carter, who I had the genuine pleasure of talking to about this topic. I asked Ms. Carter exactly what this item was, physically. Her response was ambiguous at best. "It's not really in a physical form per se," she stated. "I, of course, have not seen it yet, but I believe it will shift to what your mind perceives." I went on to ask her where this item has been all this time, or where she thinks it possibly may be. I've been following it for almost 5 years now. I can't say where it's been because I don't want ill-meaning travelers to ruin those small, beautiful towns and villages. To be clear again, I have not been in possession, nor have I seen it, but I know where it has been through my investigations. As a side note, I will say that Ms. Carter seemed genuinely convincing. Like most people, she believes that the sky is blue in this ghostly item. I'll go on with the rest of her response. I will say that I have never been more certain of its current location. The item will be found soon. Intrigued, I went on to ask what this mystery item actually does. Are any of the rumors true? Does it cure leukemia, give people superpowers, or make you telekinetic? With a slight laugh, which seemed a little condescending, she stated the following. Honestly, I do not know exactly, but I do know it is life-changing. I know this, and you can find this true happiness in the land of the smallest and biggest creatures in the world. I sat up so fast that I knocked over my energy drink and tablet, soaking the Corpus Christi Caller Times virtual article. This has been what I've been waiting for. Not spilling my drink. I've been following the item for most of my adult life. My name is Dwayne Slate. People call me D. I'm a writer. I have fortunately had 2 somewhat successful psychological drama-type novels produced in the last 6 or 7 years. I do freelance work and write short stories for the internet between novels. It's creative life. I did a deep dive on the aforementioned subject for a YouTube video, and it's curtains ever since. I've put every resource I have available into tracking the item down. I'm burning through my novel royalties like an insert addict using insert drug. I started laughing as I look at the mess I made. Despite the feelings of dread I've been consumed with, I laugh. Alien-like green liquid all over my desk, spiked with an unseen clear liquor. Vodka, to be specific. It's only 11 a.m. I don't start the brown stuff until at least after 5 p.m. Them's the rules. I'm also laughing because I'm reading some local newspaper from the southern part of Texas when I live over 1,000 miles away. I'm reading it because I have several Google alerts set up for any information on this item. One is the lady being interviewed, Ella Carter. Once I opened that alert and saw the title and the date, I knew I was about to connect a few pieces to my years of chasing the rabbit. Ms. Ella Carter, I will get into shortly. The date, December 30, is my birthday. I turned an odd 37 years old in the current year. No friends, no family left that wants to talk to me. Only 2 books that a few thousand people gave a shit enough to read. Dread is my normal baseline in my life. Quick note, it's just a personal observation. Shouldn't we call it a day of birth or our birth date? I'm pretty sure we only have one birthday. The rest of our lives are celebrating the birthday, but I'll continue. After I cleaned my table and tablet, I looked at the article to make sure what I read was what I thought. After slamming down the remaining energy drink, I made my breakfast. 2 7-Eleven breakfast burritos. Talk about living the life of Riley. I've always been interested in urban legends. I first found out about the item when I was a teenager. I can't remember where exactly, but I believe it was in a library book. I didn't have much to do as a kid, and reading was my escape. If you remember the book fair or the mobile book day, there was always a tiny section of urban legend and weird books for kids. Sasquatch, aliens, ghosts, general spookiness made our little brains go crazy in the imagination department. I happened to read this paragraph about an item that could grant you any wish you desire under a forgettable modern urban legend paperback. Even as a youngster, I understood this was probably all made up, but I loved the idea, and I never forgot it. I'd find mentions of it in many media. I dove deeper. I found a subreddit dedicated to the item. I traveled to places in the U.S. I heard it might be. I believe I was closest when I red-eyed to Savannah, Georgia. For those that know, they know. For the uninitiated, it's one of the most haunted places in the United States of America. It was here that I found the missing link, Ella Carter. My research led me to one of the hundreds of cemeteries dotting the mossy landscape. Usually cemeteries are peaceful. Most souls here have been buried according to their wishes. The dread I feel now, though? Damn. As I looked for the tombstone I believed was where the item would be, I saw nothing. "You missed her," a voice whispered from behind me. What the fuck? I slightly jumped, spinning in a 180 to see a nice old woman standing in front of me. "Oh, I'm sorry, child. Don't be afraid. I tried not to scare you." Holding my chest, I took a deep breath and spoke. "No, I'm sorry, miss. I'm sure everyone here is tired of tourists trouncing through your beautiful cemeteries." "Heavens, if you boys want to attach yourself with multiple voodoo or God knows what else spirits, we don't mind. Less for us." She said that last part with a wink. "Okay, lady," I thought in my head. You said I missed her. Who could you possibly be talking about?" "Ella," she said, looking at me like I had 3 heads. "I know what you are looking for. She's already closer than you. She's always closer. She comes by here a lot and says the energy always pools in this location. She also says she's not afraid of competitors. No one is better than her." "Geez, lady, she sure is confident to brag to strangers." I thanked her and backed away out of the cemetery slowly. The old lady watched me the entire way. I surfed the web as hard as I ever had that night in my hotel. Wi-Fi was exceptional. I shredded the waves of binary that night. I found the Ella I was looking for through my usual research sites and my subreddit friends. Ella Carter. For lack of a better term, she's the expert in the field of the item. She's closely guarded the lore and locations of the item. The gatekeeper, if you would. After setting her name as a Google alert, I've gotten a few crumbs here and there, but nothing like the big carrot I just got. She said you could find the item in the land where the largest and smallest creatures exist. I knew from some random junior high school the fact that the smallest mammal and largest fish could be found in the area of the small Asian country of Thailand. The bumblebee bat and whale shark call Thailand home. Next stop, Thailand. It's not like I jumped on a plane that night. I had to sober up. I needed to clear my head. Funny that I could solve that sentence that Ella uttered immediately. You know how we all remember strange random things. Why would I retain the knowledge that the smallest mammal and largest fish reside in Thailand? I'm sure it was interesting to me at the time from whatever teacher uttered that dumb fact. I do like bees and whale sharks, so maybe that's all there is to it. I'm sitting at my local airport 10 hours later. I never planned to board a plane to freaking Thailand in my life. I know only about the country is that the Street Fighter 2 character Sagat calls his home there. He's no slouch either. He's the second to last boss on the arcade to console fighting game. Seriously though, that's all I know about Thailand. Well, and they may allegedly have these ladyboys around as one of their prime sources of entertainment. I won't be able to find out. I have a lot of work ahead of me. Quick note and Insta update. I'm hammered. I treated myself on a Delta flight. I bought whatever package got me free booze. Preemptively, I can't wait to shake off the impending hangover so I can find the item. The liquid courage is coursing through me, telling me that I will finally be the first to uncover what this otherworldly beast is. Maybe it really is a beast, an animal. No one knows, so it could truly be anything. Maybe it's a candlestick. Maybe it's a bar of soap. Maybe it's a 3-million-year-old demon. No one can say otherwise. Not even Ms. Ella Fancy Pants. Okay, I think I finally imbibed too much free drink, which is a sentence I hate typing. I'll go to sleep now. See you in Thailand. The sun is burning through my 28th story hotel room. It's a decent view. I have a giant glass window that lets in entirely too much of that view. I don't even remember how I found this room. I think I decided to rage when I touched down. Looking around with that familiar day after haze, I correctly identify my most crucial possessions: keys, wallet, and phone. My clothes were in my suitcase too. So far, I'm up. I hope I didn't decide to visit one of those legendary ladyboys last night. I wouldn't remember anyway. Downing the crappy coffee provided in my room's suspect coffee maker, I clean myself up and head down to the lobby. My journey is just getting started. Luckily, I am a professional at recovery, so the hangover will subside very soon. The caffeine is a good head start. All I need is some grease to back it up. Look at that. A good old American Mickey D's just 10 steps from the front door of my hotel. I'll be headed to the Capitol today. Damn place tasted like Ronald himself from Illinois cooked my sausage and egg McMuffin. Delicious. I don't have any good reason why, but I have a burning sensation in my body that this is where I will find another clue from Ella if I don't find her in person. I hope that's the burning sensation I am feeling, and it does not relate to anything else. Hey everyone, D here again. Sorry for the lack of updates. It has not been a good week here in Thailand. I found something though. I found jack shit. I also did find that the Thai creams here are loaded with Thai rice wine. I bring them all to my room. I'm live streaming as we speak to my 7,000 or 8,000 viewers on Twitch. This is in real life as it gets. Yep, another day of nothing. I even have a dumb note on my table by the TV. Wait. What follows is a really fancy script. Dearest Duane, D. Thank you for completing the puzzle. Almost. I'm more than impressed that you've traveled more than 5,000 miles to find the item. You're so close, closer than most have ever been in the history of the world. I won't make it too difficult. Come to where the 24th meets the N. It's easy, like I said. You might be asking why. I don't have a clear answer for that right now. it'll be easier to speak face to face about it. See your face soon, Ella. I tossed the note towards the stupid glass wall that exposed me to the glorious view of downtown Bangkok. As depressed and anxious as I was, I can easily admit how pretty the skyline was. The dread has once again started to eat at my belly. Wait, the note said 24th and N. I've looked through every possible combination of 24th Street and street starting with the letter N. Nothing. Big old fat zero. I was stuck with the dread, consuming me like the venom symbiote consumed Eddie Brock. Then it hit me. Ella said base not once, not twice, but 3 times. I drunkenly walked by one of the most popular franchises in this wonderful country. Face to face noodles. That's how it translates to English. It's not that wordy in their language. Now all I have to do is find the noodle store with the number 24N. A simple search reveals that it is merely 1 mile away. Even though I've ravaged my body with booze, I can still walk and run without too many issues. Non-smoker too. Despite all my issues, at least I don't smoke dirty cigarettes. That must be why my cardio is still decent. I had a good pace going as I came upon the noodle store of destiny. I could see the sign from quite a distance. The neon sign flashed yellow and red in what I'd guess are 1 to 2 second intervals. It comprised of a big bowl of noodles. Shocking, I know. One motion was chopsticks in the bowl, the next lifting out with a huge ass helping of tasty noodles. I tried my best to sober up in record time and focus. I called my years of Metal Gear Solid PS1 experience to make my way to the noodle shop stealthily. The dread was releasing. The realization that I might accomplish something in my pathetic life was covering me like a fuzzy Sherpa blanket. That lasted for a good 10 seconds. I tripped into the door, rocking those alert bells that some older stores have above their door. This was an accidental trip, mind you. It was not from the rice wine. I could tell it was her from the moment I regained my footing. She was facing me, cupping a moderate-sized bowl of noodles. When she lifted her eyes to meet mine, she aggressively inhaled and simultaneously expelled a huge amount of broth and noodles. Impressive. Dwayne, you made it. Is that a question or statement? She was just staring at me in awe. This is something I was not used to. Okay, I'll talk then. I proceeded to expel a brief history lesson on myself to Ella. The depression, the closing myself off, the bullshit attempt to connect with people through my writing and pathetic streaming career. I also explained that this item was keeping me in the game. The feeling of dread I became used to over the last few years had finally gone away once I got here. I finished with a simple question. Where is it? Ella warmly smiled. She wasn't attractive in the traditional sense, but she wasn't a pile of mud either. No one has ever been closer. It's in a lesser-known palace, just 20 miles away. At a brief moment of clarity. Okay, hold on. So you've always said you don't know where this item is exactly, but you're always close. The old bag in the cemetery told me you already got the item. Ella brushed her dark hair back. Your mind is clouded right now, Dee. Go get some rest. I'll meet you at 8 a.m. sharp. No more puzzles. Meet me at this address. She slid me the address on a noodle napkin. I took one last long look at her, seeing if I could tell any more foolishness coming from her. She challenged me right back. We could have made an energy ball with how hard both of us were staring. I don't have to be some alpha. I'll submit it. I looked away and headed toward my hotel. I'd rather have the item than win a staring contest. I wake up fast and uncomfortable. Opening my eyes, it looks like I'm in the middle of a waterfall. It was the giant bucket of cold water Ella threw into my face. I instinctively try to get up, finding that my hands and feet are tied to an old steel chair. You made it on time, Ella spoke. I quickly attempt to take in my surroundings. Looks like we are in the middle of a long-abandoned, crumbling temple. I'd guess it was an ancient monastery developed over 1,000 years ago. How did I get here? Why did this happen? These are just two thoughts running through my head, which feels like it's being peppered with hammers from those little turtle hammer bros from the original Super Mario NES game. The dread is back. Ella comes close to me, taking a deep squat to meet me at eye level. We don't have much time. I'm sorry it ended like this for you, but I'm not sorry for me. I've held on to this albatross for too long. It's time that someone else takes the misery. She studies my face, knowing I could not possibly be more confused. I've always had this. She stands back up and walks behind me where I cannot see. When she returns, she has a dish with a cover on it. It's like what an old-school waiter would hold before they take the top off and reveal desserts or dinner, or you know what I mean. I hope. What I see is so comforting, so rewarding. It's a golden birdcage that could maybe fit a smaller-sized parrot. I'm not making much sense, I know. The dread is gone again. Look, think of something you love. That's a tough one for me. Look into the birdcage and imagine something you love, she says more purposefully. At that moment, my childhood German Shepherd appeared inside the cage. It was like a holograph. The sight of my old pal Chip made me so happy I instantly started sobbing. I stared at him running, rolling around, chewing on one of the massive bones we got him for Christmas. Just like that, she snapped her fingers and made it disappear. I see. This is some kind of trick or voodoo or something. Let me go and I will forget this. I spit at her. I won't call the police or tell anyone what happened. How did I even get here? This doesn't make sense. You were obviously meant to achieve this, Dee. We are all impressed. Ella coos. I suppose it's time to put the last puzzle piece down for you. The dread. That mischievous bitch was coming up from my stomach to my throat again. The birdcage, as you'll know it from now on, is an impressive item indeed. It seeks out a soul that is on its last ride, full of pain and has nothing left to live for. I started to sink. But now you have an item that can give you anything. You can live forever. I start to understand. With my eyes on the ground, I ask, so what's the catch? I wasn't looking at her, but I could feel her smirk. She knew this was coming, obviously. Well, you'll be a prisoner to the birdcage until you can find someone to take it from you. Your family won't remember you. Your friends, if you still had any, won't remember you. The birdcage will take away what truly makes you happy. You didn't even know what did make you laugh or cry or enjoy in your real life. Now you never will. You can do little parlor tricks and even amass a small fortune, but it'll be empty and hollow like this old temple. I slowly pick my head up to meet her gaze. So now I'm the gatekeeper, huh? How did you reach out and finally get my ass more than halfway around the world to get it? I've been researching this forever. Why didn't you just get it over with when I first started this? Oh, Dwayne, she scoffed. I've been trying for over 300 years. It's not as easy as you think, but you'll find out. I don't want to spoil any surprises for you. Let's just say that you can't use your energy to get through to fellow adventurers that easily. You'll figure that out. So how did you get me here? The last thing I knew, I was looking at your stupid face at that stupid noodle place, and then I was here. You remember me slipping you that napkin with the address on it, right? She said. Of course, I didn't want to agree with that quickly. I know you do, she said. That's the last step to passing over the birdcage. I know it seems easy, but you'll see how hard it is to get to that last step in the next few hundred years. And yes, I was looking at you dumbly because of the shock I was in. After so long, I finally got one. I got one to take me out of this torture. I was like you, Dee, depressed, angry, sad, lonely. I wanted so much more. I stumbled onto this mystery item that cures your life just like that. That's all I wanted, Dee. I'm sorry, it's a myth. There are no quick fixes. But I need out of this life. And now I'm here. I am typing to anybody, typing to nobody, trying to pierce the veil of whatever dimension will grant me access. I need someone to take this cage away from me. I thought my life was bad before. At least I could get drunk. Now I drink all day, every day, and don't feel anything. This item takes and takes and takes. It squeezes the last amount of joy you have. I'm looking for anyone to take this pain from me. I've planted clues, literally and figuratively. I hope to God someone takes the bait. I don't want to be in this cage anymore.
When I was a little boy, my fondest memories in summer were spending time in the North Woods at my Uncle Howard's. He had this rustic old cabin surrounded by nothing but pure nature. The local hunters called it Howard's Hideout. Every time my brother John and I would visit, a new adventure would await us. But as you grow up, those things fade, and you find yourself focusing on the adventures of adulthood. They weren't nearly as fun, and you can't just wriggle your nose and change the story. I wish I could change this story. But this isn't about me. It's about my uncle and the legacy he left behind. Howard died last June from a massive heart attack. I remember John called me at work to tell me the news. He knew I was always incredibly close to our uncle. A rush of memories flooded over me after I got off the phone. Fishing down at the creek, setting snares along the property line, listening to old westerns as he popped a bag of kettle corn over the open stove. What stuck out the most was the ghost stories Uncle Howard would tell. That evening, John and I went out for drinks, and I asked him what his favorite campfire story Howard told us was. Gee, bro, I don't know. He told us a lot of crazy things, he said with a laugh. I prodded him for a moment longer, and finally he gave in and said, "That one about the bear." I sat there and drank my whiskey, remembering the story quite well. Uncle Howard had a way of making the monsters extra vivid in his stories, and none of them were more frightening than the entity that John recalled. According to our uncle, the creature was about as large as a 7-foot-tall man, with massive claws that could tear a person into 12 pieces all at once. Papa Bear is what he called it. Apparently, despite being so fearsomely large, Papa Bear was not all that dangerous, so Howard assured us. He's a protector of these woods, keeps the good in and the bad out. That's why you boys are safe here. Papa Bear is watching out for us, he said. Apparently, Papa Bear decided who was and wasn't welcome in the woods and eliminated any threats to keep the forest secure and magical. Though I knew that John and I were spared somehow, I recalled every detail of what happened to its victims. Those who trespassed were not simply killed. I knew even as a young boy Uncle Howard was trying to make sure we kept nature clean, but still, it scared the hell out of me. He made sure to tell us that the victims became slaves to the abomination, tasked to clean the forest that they had defiled, especially at night when the wind would whistle through the old cabin and make everything sound so loud, like a groaning noise or a wailing. I remembered vividly hiding under the covers one night when the sounds went on for hours. I didn't even get up to go to the bathroom and instead peed on myself to stay safe. "What do you think will get the cabin?" John asked me, bringing my mind back to the present. I had to admit I didn't know, considering that my uncle and aunt had divorced quite some time ago. "It seems a shame just to let it sit out there," I said. Later that same week, I spoke with his second ex-wife, Denise, on the phone. Our Aunt Rena died around the time I went to college. Denise admitted she didn't really have any idea about the last will and testament, or if it even included anything about the cabin, but promised she'd look into it. That Saturday, my dad and I went to hear the reading of the will. A few of our other relatives I hadn't seen in a while were there. I even saw Howard's estranged son, Walker, show up. Wasn't he in prison? My dad whispered to me when he walked in. "You're the cop, not me," I said back as Walter sat down a few rows ahead of us. "You know what? I think I remember now. It was just a misdemeanor on illegal possession, but they always thought he might have been involved in the Cooper case. My dad whispered back. You know what my dad meant if you had lived around this area long enough. About 6 years back, a family went missing on the north stretch of the interstate, near the state line, for those of you who don't. The investigation into their disappearance revealed that they'd planned a fishing trip for the family into the woods, husband and wife and 2 girls. Shannon, the oldest girl, was the only body they ever found around a year later. She had somehow survived that long out in the woods and was trying desperately to reach civilization, but ended up running into a meth lab. The same meth lab that Walker had been busted for a few months after her body was found there. I'd never read the full report, but it struck me as odd that the timing of the 2 events were so close together. A few moments after my dad made his comment, the cabin was mentioned in the will, and to my shock and dismay, Walker managed to get the property. I followed him outside after the reading was finished and found him leaning against the building, smoking a joint. "Brian, it's been a while," he said as he offered me a smoke. He gave me a lopsided smile. "I'm clean now, Walker. Pretty crazy about your dad, huh?" I told him. He nodded, not saying much. I knew that he'd always been jealous of John and I. Uncle Howard had always been much more of a father to us than him, and I was positive that he had always been rubbed the wrong way by that. "So what you need, Brian? I know you didn't come out here to chew cud with me," he said. "You going to the funeral tomorrow?" I asked. "I gotta pay respects to the old man," Walker answered. "I know it's probably an odd request, but I was hoping maybe I could handle the distribution of his remains," I said. "His ashes?" he asked with a nervous laugh. I was just thinking about his cabin out there and how much he loved it. I explained as I tried not to tear up. I knew Walker wouldn't understand, but I was surprised when he agreed to let me have the canister. "You can fling 'em all up and down the county for all I care," he said as he tossed his burnt cig down. I talked with John about my intentions to head to the cabin that next weekend, and my brother suggested we make a camping trip out of it, a final way to say goodbye to Uncle Howard. We drove up that Saturday morning in the late June heat. We took John's pickup truck, and I remembered keeping myself cool by using a wet rag and some ice because he didn't have AC. By the time we'd arrived, I was sweating so bad I decided to head down to the creek for a swim. "You ain't getting out of helping me get all this inside," my brother told me. Even though we both felt like we would have had a heat stroke, I helped him carry our luggage inside and set it down on the couch. "It still looks like it's in good condition," John said. I have to admit I was impressed with the cabin's cleanliness, and I immediately wondered how long it had been since Howard had been here. He loved this place, I realized. We looked around at some of the hunting trophies that he had hanging on the wall, and I remembered Howard teaching me how to skin small birds to prepare them for the stuffing process. Remember that all things on this earth are created to serve men, boy. You don't get to hurt God's creation, and you want to respect life, Howard told me. I saw one of the geese I helped preserve and reached up to touch the feathers. It was amazing how it seemed in perfect condition after all these years. The woods made everything feel even more inviting, like we were taking a trip back in time and experiencing everything for the first time. We followed the West Trail, listening to the gentle singing birds and looking at some of the old snares that Howard still had set up. Once the trail ended, we relied on memory alone to reach the creek. The water looked as clear as it had when we were kids. I didn't take a moment to hesitate and tossed my shoes off and let my feet relax on the right side of the stream. We stayed down at the creek for about an hour, and then John suggested we do a little hunting. John took off his shirt and jumped into the deeper portion of the creek, howling excitedly. It felt good to be here. Back at the cabin, I walked down to the basement to find any of our uncle's guns. The basement was in a bit more disrepair than upstairs, but I recalled that Howard used it as a spare closet, storing all his junk there. Near the back of the room, I found a small locked cache where he kept all his rifles, and then rummaged through the other drawers nearby for the key. A gentle sound, like a whisper, seemed to creep into the room slowly, and it made me pause in what I was doing. Then the noise grew louder. It sounded like the noises we heard when we were younger, a gentle, muffling wail. I took the keys and grabbed a few guns, leaving the basement behind, and feeling a little unsettled. As we walked toward the woods, I told John about it. "We're barely here for a few hours, and you're already hearing things? Man, I can't wait for tonight," he joked. I laughed it off as nerves or just my imagination. We followed the other trail behind the cabin up toward the mountains. I brought our uncle's ashes along, remembering one of his favorite spots was along the path. It was a scenic overlook of the forest itself and the nearby lake. Uncle Howard usually wouldn't let us come up there as kids because of the steep slopes. There was one time, though, that he did when we accidentally shot a deer in the wrong spot, and it was unfit for eating. I thought we were going up the slope to bury it. Howard showed me a pit where other hunters also disposed of carcasses. "This keeps the bears happy," he explained. After a bit of trial and error, I found the pit and decided this would be a perfect spot to release Howard's ashes. I held a handkerchief over my mouth and opened the canister, watching as the wind carried them away. Then my attention was drawn toward the pit itself, and I noticed something out of the ordinary. It took me a minute to realize what it was. I shouted out as I took a few steps back from the edge. John was there in a second, and I wordlessly pointed down the slope to where the littered remains of a few bones were, along with a human skull. "Jesus," John said. He decided to climb down and examine the bones. A few minutes later, he was back up the slope, with me looking concerned. "We should probably call Dad. I can't tell for sure if that was an accident or something much worse," John explained. Neither of us said anything as we returned to the cabin. I almost felt like we were being watched, but once we got there, I decided I wasn't going to let it ruin the weekend. I searched through Howard's freezer and found some thawed deer meat at the top to cook. John was walking around the cabin trying to get reception on his phone, and then finally admitted, "This is what I get for switching to T-Mobile." I checked mine and noticed I had a few bars, so I passed it to him, and he walked outside to make the call. I walked to the back of the cabin where the propane stove was and turned on the gas to get everything heated and paused as I listened to the soft whistle of the ignition light coming on. Beneath that noise, I was sure I heard the same wails I heard earlier, and a repetitive thudding noise. It made me feel very uncomfortable as I cooked and ignored the sound. When John came back in, he told me Dad would be there first thing in the morning to examine the body. The noises had stopped for the moment, but I was becoming more convinced than ever that the cabin was haunted. That evening, as the sun went down, John searched through the second-story closets for blankets, and we both agreed to sleep in the living room. "If this place is haunted, we'll know tonight, won't we?" he said. I stayed awake until almost 1 a.m, listening for anything. Then at last the noises returned. It sounded like gentle footsteps. Then there were voices. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I instantly woke up John. He switched on the lights in the living room and listened as well. The noises were growing louder. "What the hell?" John said as he felt something under him, but neither of us could see anything on the floor. Then I felt it too, like a low vibration. Nervously, we moved to the second floor. The noises became more subdued, and somehow we found a way to get sleep. In the morning, Dad got there, and we guided him to the ridge. "Should we tell him about the other thing?" I asked John as we trekked up the mountainside. "Tell me what?" Dad asked. He always had excellent hearing. "This is probably going to sound crazy, but Uncle Howard's place? It's got ghosts," John answered. Dad looked at us both skeptically, but we insisted he come back to the cabin and see for himself. We all headed inside, and John and I tried our best to explain what we heard. "It felt like something was moving around under our feet," John said. Dad was trying not to roll his eyes. Then the noises returned, soft and subdued like before. He pulled out his firearm and looked around, muttering, What sort of prank is this? It's for real, Dad, I said as we walked around the cabin, listening to the strange moaning noises. Dad made his way toward the stairs, walking carefully to the basement. The thudding got louder as we looked around the basement, and then Dad gestured for us all to be quiet and still. I was too scared to move a muscle. Then he walked toward Howard's old tool cabinet and started to push it aside. I watched silently as he revealed a large wooden door with a metal lock hidden behind it. The noises were coming from the other side. Dad pointed his weapon at the lock and shot it off without hesitation, and all of us stood there in fear as the door creaked open. A thin, skeletal woman collapsed on the floor in front of us. Dad rushed over to help her, quickly glancing at the bruises on her legs and arms like she'd been chained. "Don't just stand there, call 911, Dad shouted at us. John took out his phone immediately as I took a few steps toward the door. A dark tunnel beyond that curved into the solid earth, and I found myself stepping toward to see what the darkness hid. As it curved around, I found myself standing directly under the living room in a wide-open den where more chains were latched to the ground, as though meant for animals. The place reeked of the smell of urine and feces. I held my hand over my mouth as I looked across the room to see the decaying corpses of at least 2 other women, and at last I understood. John followed me down there and then found himself running and vomiting. I found a large cabinet on the west side of the dungeon filled with photographs. I cannot begin to describe what Howard made them do while they were trapped down there. The woman that Dad rescued turned out to be the youngest of the Coopers that had gone missing 6 years ago. She did not live for another 2 days due to bladder failure. It's been almost 10 months now since I went to the cabin. I've tried not to think about the horrors I've found there, but lately they've consumed my every thought. And John, he handled it the worst. The guilt made him take his life. Once he realized the actual depth of our uncle's depravity, all those times we spent summer there, giggling when we listened to the low wails that whispered their way through his cabin. I've returned to the cabin now with one singular mission. I doused the entire first floor with gasoline, then activated the stove on a low setting. I sat out in the pickup truck and watched as it burned. It sounded like the cabin was screaming as it fell apart in shambles, like it was in pain. But the pain I feel will always be more tremendous.
That which is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil. Friedrich Nietzsche. These weren't like the old days, Jerfastelak mused. No. In this black age, nothing like that peace could be found. They had pain birds now, killing birds. Great, screaming, swooping demons that raked the sky and shat fire. Rattled the bones brittling across the cave's floor. These death birds were not all they had. One bright morning, while gathering food for he and his lover, Moazarith, Jerfastelak had idled a few moments, sprawled among yellow bursts of primrose. A cool flower breeze washed over the hill. Suddenly, the sky caught fire. A second sun rose and blossomed into a blazing mushroom. The earth shuddered, then rumbled as if about to open and swallow its children. The flash blinded Jerfastelak. Wild terror surged through him. When sight and stability returned, he saw a horror. Below the hill on which he stood, far away from the yellow flowers, the colony of the Ugly Ones burned. From this vantage point, Jerfastelak was spared nothing. Could see the colony lay flat, twisted, and unrecognizable save for one tall structure near the river. Scattered fires raged, cries of the maimed, the dying, could be heard borne upon the burning wind. At that moment, 2 wishes choked Jerfastelak's heart. I wish these visions, these sounds did not exist. and I wish to forget them." Moazareth, upon hearing the tale of annihilation from her lover, sank into sorrow. Nothing Jerfastelak did could lift from her this dark veil. The crushing of rodents went unnoticed. 7 carapace-cracking dives from the tallest cliff barely took her attention off the lazy arc of a falling leaf. Levitating Moazareth into the air merely lulled her into fitful slumber. She hardly paid his antics any attention, not even when Jerfastelak raised a pincer, punched into his abdomen, and drizzled the molten gold that pulsed inside over a scuttling hermit crab. So profound was Moazareth's anguish she refused even to wear the gilded gift around her neck, despite the considerable difficulty Jerfastelak endured trapping the squid, hostile and slippery, whose entrails he braided into a string for the plated crab. Was there no way to cheer her? Had Jerfastelak's news of the devastation been solely responsible for his lover's distress? Leaving Moazareth cloaked in sorrow, he went searching for some remedy that might restore her. Sad and alone, Ushiro Funakashi climbed the steep trail that cut through the land above his secluded cottage in Kamuriyama. Ushiro had fled the bleak horrors of war and spent each morning running toward the sky in green silence, exhaling the stink of his past. In these hills, along this twisting secret path, he hoped to sweeten the bitterness poisoning his heart, fill the void in his days once occupied by his father. Tadashi Funakoshi, strong as the bamboo and pine around the family home, had given himself to the rising sun as a pilot in the suicide force known as the Divine Wind. He died the noble kamikaze death. What was noble about it? Kamikaze. Divine Wind indeed. Father was dead. Ushiro's photographs of him possessed in their abandonment a weird dignity, at once iconic and mocking, unbearable. The Americans and their atomic bombs had drained the spirit from Japan. No divine wind ever imagined could have extinguished those infernos. Ushiro rounded a weedy bend, sensed something deep in the forest pacing him. He stopped, heart hammering his ribs. He listened. From the undergrowth leapt a pair of chirping crickets. "Oh!" Ushiro cried and laughed. They hopped across the path, flitted into dense ferns. He stepped into the dark woods. Here, among fern and flower, was a small pool. The waters emanated a fragrance of drowned lilies, and Ushiro counted 9 at the bottom, white stars set in green. A praying mantis clicked across his sandals, but Ushiro stood still as the pool. The exotic insect had as much right to live as he, perhaps more. At least you, stick-legs, take life only when you hunger, or in self-defense. As if reading his mind, the mantis deftly snatched a cricket from the pool's edge and, with a crack, pinched off its head. Ushiro shuddered, beheld his pale reflection in the pool. Rain began to fall, spatting ceaseless circles. The young man's image shivered and blurred. A downpour ensued. Leaves wept. Behind Ushiro, a twig snapped. He pulled his gaze from the pool. Great Bushi. Whether what towered above him was dragon, hummingbird, or beetle, Ushiro could not decide. The sight of it stopped his breath and sense. This must be Furyu, a reminder of the imperfection in perfection. Or, something whispered in Ushiro's heart, was it just the opposite? Bending at one scarlet joint, the Furyu bowed its gold-green head and with some effort drank the pool. Delicately it raised itself, steam sighed from lemon mandibles, and it was not without awe that Ushiro beheld those unblinking eyes of emerald, glittering in the rain like 2 fantastic jewels. The Furyu gazed down in judgment, fixed the man in place with those mesmerizing discs. Ushiro's terror abated. Tranquility bloomed. With this came a flood of images. Father leaving for war. Mother not weeping until that night, alone in the bedroom. Lightning at dawn, a violent fork stabbing the sea. Doves scattering from the eaves of a dead temple. The drunken painter in Kyoto splashing snow, cherry, cobalt, orange, lime. The Shiro seated in the overheated schoolroom, his shoes too tight. The Shiro's last thought, before this perfection ended him, howled like a winter tempest. Great Bushi, 1,000-year-old samurai, I go with you to join my father. Jerfastelak wandered the solemn pines for days. Light and dark went unnoticed beneath his attention. Soon, thirst would kill him, but his olfactory lobes detected water. Thirst, though, was a minor concern compared to his pulsing dread. What if no way could be found to deliver Moazarith from her misery? Should she perish, there would follow nothing but blackness and solitude, for where did others of her kind exist? Jerfastelak concluded that life without his lover would be unbearable. If she died, he would engineer his own demise rather than live in desolation, sentenced for eternity to the prison of loneliness. There, straight ahead to the water, something approached. Plip-plop, plip-plop, plip-plop. From the sound, a sizable creature, fleeing some beast larger still, dashing toward water. Ahead, shards of sunlight cut through trees. A clearing. Jerfastelak quickened his step, careful not to cause a stir. Fat raindrops began falling. In seconds, dark clouds dumped water in torrents, pummeled the ferns. Green saplings nodded as though confirming Jerfastelak's plight, but the rain could not mask the ever-rising scent. Their scent. This was not strong. Probably just one of them. Hardly a threat. Never had Jerfastelak stood near an ugly one, so curiosity ruled his behavior as much as thirst. He broke through the undergrowth. Here was a quiet pool. The ugly one glanced up, its face pale and moist. How tiny are you? Jerfastelak thought. The other appeared impossibly soft and fragile, face revealing every nuance of emotion. Could such a being actually slaughter its own kind? Jerfastelak drew closer. Fright quivered the flesh of the ugly one who, after all, really was not so ugly. It fears me. I must not cause fear. Must not trouble this one. What if the tiny creature led others to the pool? Jerfastelak ended this possibility by bending nearly in two and drinking the pool. Ah. Life, relief, soothing cold. The ugly one stood solemn. Jerfastelak stretched across the empty pool. I shall console you. He grasped the creature by its neck. No, no, do not struggle. Do not fear, shrilled Jerfastelak, unaware that his voice, to the limited hearing of the other, shrieked unintelligibly. Jerfastelak's hold weakened, and in his haste to regain it, clenched his pincher, severing the head of the ugly one, when he had meant only comfort. The head spun through rainy air, spewing blood and smashing against a rock, cracking open and flinging bits of gray, white, and red across the ground. Oh, what have I done? Warm shards oozed over Jerfastelak's clawed feet. I have ended it. Then he saw tiny white bones scattered through the moss. Fascinated, he dropped the leaking corpse into the weeds, stooped, and plucked several bones from the springy moss. Beauty. There is beauty and perfection in these. One bone, incredible, bore a gold plug or seal. How had this creature procured blood from one such as Jerfastelak? What secrets might have we shared had I not ended you? Into his mouth went the bones, mandibles clacked shut. Powerful digestive acids flooded the orifice, dissolving the ugly one's teeth. gold mingling with that of Jafastalak's circulatory system. After a few moments, there came a strange elation. Energy, unlike any before, thrummed through his limbs. The white bones must possess curative effects. Perhaps these should be fed to Moazarith. Hope. Hope. Sudden pain spiked his thorax. With a pincher, he punctured his shell, probed, and located the irritant. Wrenching it free, he revealed a malleable white mass larger far than the original bones ingested. Some strange alchemy must have occurred between them and their taker's digestives, but Jafastalak would not be intimidated. Curious, he played with and molded the warm blob. This conjured a memory. Once, while cooling off in a rushing river, he had scooped clay from the weedy bed. Moazarith had taken this and, with skilled, sensitive pincers and mind sight, sculpted it into a likeness of her lover. Could this material be likewise formed? Already it grew firm. He must hurry. Bracing the mass with the pincher, he took the other and squeezed, scraped, stippled, and pulled. Mind sight added further detail. An inspired burst of activity created the figure of a hopping croaker, an albino with eyes golden and bulging. This must be good. Must be. The headless body of Ushiro Funakashi lay undiscovered for months until one autumn night, when the crickets creaked and the moon daubed his bones with its luminous brush. A spider crept onto them, spun a chaotic web between two ribs and, where once pulsed a young man's heart, assumed its silent sentinel, glittering in moonglow like a jet crystal. If Ushiro's starving ghost haunted the place of his death, it did not disturb one thread of the spider's net. Jafastalak saw his lover lay dying and shrilled her name. Every bird, beast, and insect fled that unearthly howl. He stood over her, offered the white figure. "Eat this, Moazarith. You must." Weakly, she opened her mandibles, eyes brightening but for a moment as she recognized what the object represented. Her lover fed her the albino croaker. With an effort, Moazarith broke down the hard enamel. She shuddered, vibrated her thorax. "What charms does this conceal?" Jafastalak leaned close. "I do not know, but it filled me with the breath of youth." Gazing into the twin gems of her eyes, he could see fiery life. Would she live? Thrive as before? Moazarith, after absorbing the figure, produced no precipitate. Her lover reasoned that his own caustics must have greatly weakened whatever catalyst activated the process. What else could account for this? 2 sunfalls passed during which Moazarith shone floridly in good health. On the third, as twilight spilled deep blue into the cave, her robust demeanor dwindled, then wholly failed. Alerted by her hollow tone, Jafastalak knew something was terribly wrong. "The white croaker," she managed. "Bring me more. Bring me many." Creeping shadows settled over her like a shroud of doom. Embracing her, Jafastalak again tasted the dread of solitude. Moazarith, of course, did not know where the albino croaker originated, nor what her lover had done to obtain its ingredients. Jafastalak, as strongly as he loathed to repeat the act, feared more losing his beloved to the black waters of the river of death. "Lover," she pleaded. "Hurry." Her golden tongue traced Jafastalak's plated throat. Easing her onto the cool cave floor, he determined to hunt day and night, gather so copious a cache of bones he need never leave Moazarith's beauty again. Any pain, any horror was preferable to a life barren and loveless. He must hurry, go out into the world and collect what must be collected. Any living thing that dare stand in his path would know the face of death. Here rose a hill, a view, a special place. The bleak hunter surveyed the province of the dead. Would not there be a nearly limitless supply of the tiny bones here, free to harvest? Jerfastelak ascertained he was not being watched and climbed down from his perch. Beneath purple twilight, the burial ground stood stark and silent. Trees twisted and black clawed at the moon's silver scythe. At the heart of this necropolis, a tall light post ticked with moths. Honey-sweet whiffs of paraffin and incense lingered in the air, phantoms of some recent ritual. The hunter moved among ranked stone monuments, some taller than he. Any grave would suffice. There came a sensation, as nameless as it was novel. Ushiro Funakoshi, were he alive and not suffocating in the endless night of transmigration, might have called this awe. The hunter had never seen another of his kind in death. All he knew of his and Moazarith's existence was that both were immensely old. Of their origins he knew nothing. He paused before a bulky gray monument which bore the chiseled likeness of an ugly one, slanted eyes, long mournful expression, as though the face might slide from the stone like shadow crossing water. Below this, rows of sharp etchings like marching insects. From this grave, the hunter absorbed an aura of violence, hatred, and betrayal. Did this originate with its attendants, or the occupant? At once there bloomed a vision, a solitary figure, perched on the edge of a chasm boiling with crimson mist. Above this, the sun towed a flaming raft of clouds. The figure cried out, jumped into the abyss. Whoever lay below in black silence was not mourned. Jerfastelak bowed to the earth, extended his pincers, spread the lemon blades of his mandibles, and scored the soil. At first its dead solidity resisted, but soon the exhumation was finished. The hunter's pincers scraped against something harder than the musty dark earth. He straightened to his full height of 13 feet and drew huge breaths from the gloom. Finally, braced about the grave's periphery by 4 of his spiky limbs, he reached into the pit and gripped the coffin. Slowly he raised it toward dying twilight, brasswork gleaming beneath the moon's cold face. Brighter stars jeweled the sky, indifferent suns flaring nothingness. The hunter rested his prize on the ground and, with a violent stroke, smashed its lid into long splinters. Offended by the strong odor, Jerfastelak's olfactory lobes twitched. The corpse's flesh shone pale green, patched here and there with gray rot and shiny with moisture. The hunter lifted the body from its seclusion, eased it onto dewy grass. Death lent the face a composure both stern and tragic, as though this ugly one's sleep stirred still with dreams of ruined empires, of love lost. The hunter touched the flesh. Its taut chill unsettled him, and for the first time, he wondered what life as an ugly one might be like. What terrors, what hopes, what joys. With a delicacy belying his size, the hunter prized apart the corpse's jaws, took the flat sides of both pincers and clamped the skull, squeezing until, with a loud report, it split like a rotten log. Thick, putrid fluid welled up. Unanchored teeth were gathered, others pried from dry sockets. Abruptly, the hunter sampled one. Rage blazed. Useless. These bones were useless. Dead. All traces of life force gone. Waste! My struggle and sorrow futile. Dead! Dead! In his fury, the hunter walloped the gravestone, smashing it into jagged pieces. Headless with despair, he turned from the pit and shambled toward the looming hills. Though unaware, the hunter bled droplets of molten gold from a fissure in his carapace. After a few moments, these cooled in dewy grass. Perhaps on the morrow some mourner, sad and starved, might gather them, follow their trail to the desecrated grave, and wonder, with drumming heart and wide eyes, why some terrible goblin had felt compassion enough to scatter such riches along this path of misery. Dawn. The sun sailed above the horizon like a blob of molten bronze. The sky blushed a marriage of rose and flame. From his concealment, the hunter regarded this vista with anticipatory calm. Only the jewels of his eyes broke the mirrored surface of the pond in which he lay. Now and then, dragonflies and rainbow wings lit upon them, hummed and buzzed and clicked, before taking to the air once more. Not far from the pond stood a fence of cross-hatched steel, the top adorned with razored loops of barbed wire. Beyond this stretched black runways, seemingly endless, blurred by heat shimmer. As the hunter watched, a silver skyraker raced toward him, gaining speed with each moment, then nosed sharply into crisp morning air. The thing whined over the pond and headed for sunrise. The hunter rose dripping, locked his emerald gaze and, focusing his mind sight, pulled the aircraft from the sky. With great velocity it plunged earthward, engines screaming their torment. Sunlight flashed across a row of windows. An instant before impact, 52 minds wailed their common doom, piercing the hunter's resolve and nearly undoing him. The ground shuddered with the crash. The aircraft plowed through 1,000 feet of tall grass, shrieking, crumbling, scattering a fiery litter of metal, plastic, and people. Heat wavering from hissing fires did not deter the hunter, for the gold of his very blood burned hotter far. He must hurry, harvest what he came for lest the ugly one spot him. Quickly, quickly. Hooked by a mangled engine cowling, the armless torso, and the head, of an ugly one smoldered. The rest of him must be lost among the widely strewn wreckage. The hunter loomed over his prey, bent at his scarlet abdomen, and pried open the broken mouth, deftly extracting those bones intact enough for use. These he deposited into his own mouth for storage. Farther along the path of burning debris he found his fortune. Here was a fantastic union of bodies. 2 females, locked in an embrace. Squashed onto them an obese male whose open back revealed layers of yellow fat, shattered bone, and the head of one of the females. Fused by flame into a single entity, the threesome became, in death, more intimate than any fevered fantasy in life. Although he did not care for the stench of this collage, the hunter carried out his duty. Finally, heading back toward the pond, his path lay hindered by a melting seat. Still strapped in, an ugly one burned. Little more than blackened bone, smoking hair and gristle, it screamed at the sight of death's angel. Shock surged through the hunter, but he soon regained focus and emptied the smoldering skull of its fare. He continued collections for a few minutes when the eerie wail of rescue sirens drove him to escape. Mouth heavy with teeth taken from the newly dead, the hunter made for the hills. Ghosts of annihilation wailed from the field of wreckage. With each stride of his insect legs, the hunter's mouth rattled its catch, as if hail battered the inner surface of his skull. It tasted strange. That music. Moazareth lay unconscious. Jerfastelak parted his lover's mandibles and dropped the tiny bones into her mouth. She cooed softly, acknowledged his presence. All at once she convulsed. "Swallow them!" Jerfastelak demanded. No good. She was choking. With a pincher, Jerfastelak probed into her, unseated the mass, and consumed it. Moazareth gave a feeble wheeze. Caustic juices welled into her lover's mouth to liquefy its morsels. Immediately, he felt the pulsing fullness in his thorax. Punching through his carapace, he extracted the white glob, spattered the cave in a rain of burning gold, a shower that would end any other creature. Smoke swirled like morning mist. Left with no alternative, Jerfastelak force-fed his lover, shrilling all the while. "Please, please, please." A clacking as of submerged seashells sounded inside Moazarith. She rose, extending 8 green spiked limbs, carapace flushed with the iridescent gold of health. "My Moazarith!" Jerfastalak embraced her, their golden tongues twined, untwined when Moazarith gently released from her lover's heat. "I doubted your return," she shrilled, "but you've shown me the folly of such thoughts." Jerfastalak surged with guilt over his recent musings, his abominable self-pity. His gaze met hers, and he saw there a violent beauty. The hunter's heart boomed. Around Moazarith's head formed a brilliant nimbus, nearly unbearable to behold. She levitated until taller than her lover. At that moment, Jerfastalak would gladly have given himself to death. So searing, so erotic was this vision. In the face of beauty, dread is annulled. "It is fortunate," shrilled Moazarith, "that you have triumphed and returned. I would not relish the task of raising our offspring alone." Dizziness invaded Jerfastalak. All at once, it did not matter that he and Moazarith were alone in the Ugly One's cheerless world. Were they not, by virtue of their very existence, miracles in such a place? One offspring, glorious, pulsed within Moazarith's womb. Would not others follow, fill the emptiness of their days? "The ages we have seen," Jerfastalak shrilled, "and shared." Something must be done to honor those whose lives had been ended so that Moazarith could keep hers. Jerfastalak took in a large quota of bones. After a few moments, he punched into himself, showered hot gold everywhere. Already his carapace began resealing. His lover dripped nuggets, white mass in pincher. He began. The Ugly Ones had not died in vain. For the artistry of their death, angels sculpted a replica of the sky-raker in which they had ended. Prideful, Jerfastalak shrilled, "A plaything for our young."
It all started with me playing my horn most nights down at Vinny's in the village. It was just up the street from a couple of the bigger joints featuring the likes of Goodman, Basie, and Dorsey, you know. Those cats. And dames like Billy and Ella, showing them what for. It was an okay gig, I suppose, playing for drinks and tips and the hopes of meeting some of the classier acts in town. And maybe swinging a sit-down where I could maybe show them what I could do with the horn. Then I'd be right up there with the big boys and smooth sailing to a headliner. Maybe even become the next Harry James. Well, fellas gotta dream big, you know. Some nights there'd be big tips if the dolls were singing, enough to keep me in the 50-cent flop where I hung my hat, and maybe a few clams left over for reefer now and then. Ah, jeez, where's my manners? Name's Johnny Seckler, and no H in Johnny. Mom must have thought she was paying by the letter and figured she'd save a bit in the long run on the clipped moniker. I'm an ordinary Joe, I guess, who just happens to play the horn like old man Gabriel himself. I know it, and the tips show it. But I just never got that big break. Never ran with the right crowd, you could say. So there I was, staying afloat mostly, even if my aft end was taking on water. Now, before we go any further, I gotta tell you about Mr. Mike. See, Mr. Mike was the local tough guy, a big man in every sense of the word, over 6 feet and, well, Mr. Mike was a man of substantial proportion, if you just get my drift. Always wore a crisp white suit, spotless like it just came out of the cleaners, and a white fedora and spats. Where he ever found that getup is anybody's guess. Probably had it made up special over in Jersey someplace. He had his fingers in all the joints and even the small fry grocery stores. Now, I'm not saying he ran the big classy clubs. I heard tell those guys were all fixed up with the boys in Brooklyn, if yous know what I mean. No, Mr. Mike was a local boy born and bred, so they say, and some older guys even claim they remember him from school, but I'm not so sure. But now he was rich as Midas himself. Kept a mansion on 5th Avenue up in the 100 someplace with all the trimmings, and a big silver shadow and driver done up like Jeeves to sport him around, being seen and gathering up the take. He always had 2 guys with him lurking in his wake like junkyard dogs that didn't see 3 squares with any regularity. Needless to say, nobody was messing around with Mr. Mike. On the other hand, and it's always about the other hand, ain't it? Mr. Mike was the kind of guy who can make all a fella's dreams come true. Long as he played ball his way and did whatever little favors the big guy wanted done, just to show your gratitude. That's what he always said. It was just that, see? Johnny Sekla wanted no part of any of it. He'd make it his way, or he'd fail with the best of them and never owe nobody nothing. So things were going along as they do. The 3 Carmens were singing backup for us that one summer. 3 class dames, all named Carmen, or so that was the story. It was a good gimmick and made for a nice marquee out front. I never knew this for the longest time, but the girls were run by Mr. Mike. I never figured Vinny was in cahoots with the likes of him, but then if he puts the finger on you and you don't want to get torched some night, I guess you pretty much gotta play ball. I suppose I just turned a blind eye, didn't want to know nothing, until it was too damn late. My buddy Skitch, who beat the tubs at Vinny's, and I were gonna head up to Harlem this one night to catch his twin brother Ray on tenor sax at the Peacock Club. I was waiting at the bar, and the kid was taking his sweet time getting into his duds, and it was already late, so I went and pounded on the door. When I got no answer, I yelled for him, and yelled again, and then kicked the door in. There was Skitch on the floor, the needle still in his arm and a damned grin on his face. He was gone. Just like that, the kid was gone. I wanted to punch the little bastard in the mug real bad, but instead, all I could do was sit there on the floor and hold him, and bawl like a baby. Skitch had been like my kid brother, and now he was gone. The guys got me out of there and cleaned up and called the ambulance. They knew it was too late for Skitch, but you had to try. Then I made my way up to the Peacock in a haze and gave Ray the news. He staggered to a chair and fell into it, thanked me for coming and told me to beat it. He knew I wasn't to blame. I never touched that shit, but he had to make sense of things his own way. I kind of linked those 2 things as some kind of gateway to what was to come, finding out Vinny was glad handling Mr. Mike, and then the kid's death. So it was no real surprise when a couple of days after the funeral, Vinny called me down to the club a few hours early. I walked in, and there's Vinny and Mr. Mike laughing like old pals, 6 empties on the table between them. They called me over, I sat down, and just like that, Vinny leaves. I was still not thinking square from all that had happened, and maybe I only half understood the offer to move uptown a few blocks and start a real paying gig with Fatty Arquette and his band at Cafe Rula Lulu on Central Park West, a real swank address I'd never even seen the insides of before. Part of me must have said yes, because a week later, I was setting up at Lulu, watching the dames with the floor show fluttering around like cockatoos in their sequins and big feather fan-fans. Lulu was a swell joint, a great lit-up marquee out front, a real stage, and an orchestra pit with Lulu's written in fancy script on the front of our music stands. Sexy but respectable costumes for the girls, the whole bit. And a dance floor where 100 couples could mop up the dust with their twinkle toes. And as many tables with white tablecloths, the whole class act. You bet I was glad for the gig. I told myself, as you do of course, that it was just a job, a chance. That big break I knew I had coming to me one day, and that Johnny Seckler's ship had finally glided into port. I was there to play the horn and get paid and go home. That was it. No favors, no frills, nothing but the music. Yeah, I told myself that bedtime story like you do when you know somehow that you're climbing into bed with the devil and he was gonna ride you hard till he was through with you before dumping you in an alley somewhere. But it started out okay. Lulu was a gas. She must have been a real looker in her day, and wasn't so bad now when she was pushing 50. She mamaed everybody, the girls, musicians, regulars, everybody. But she turned cold as an iceberg on 2 occasions. Whenever some old soak tried to get smart and started playing grab-ass with one of the girls in the show, and then on those rare but all too memorable times when Mr. Mike strolled in to take a look around and collect what Lulu owed him. I wondered how she'd gotten mixed up with the guy, knowing she was a real stand-up gal every day of the week and twice on Sundays. Whatever barrel Mr. Mike had Lulu over was a mean one, and none of her doing. Just like me. Yeah, and I'd walked in with my eyes wide open. As I say, everything was going along okay, I guess, and then this new dame showed up out of the blue, and Lulu said she was the new headliner. We all looked at each other, wondering what had happened to Lulu's sister Mandy, who had been there forever, singing second only to the big names when we could get them. All Lulu ever said was Mandy had gone back home to look after the mother. I never bought that yarn. Nobody did. I figured Mr. Mike had put the squeeze on her in favor of this new broad, and Lulu had to just put up. But then there was Dolores, that new singer and hoofer. One look at Dolores and I knew she was trouble. Big time. But I was smitten the minute I laid eyes on her. Knocked off my feet. 6 feet under with no regrets. She had dark hair done up in waves and crimps on top of her head, and she was curvy in all the right places. She took one look at me and smiled, and I knew just where we was headed. Now, I was never one of those dreamboat kind of guys. I was shorter than some, but no jockey by a long shot. Okay in the mug, sandy blonde hair, and enough of it to cover everything that needed covering. And a goatee that some of the cats were sporting these days. And I liked what I saw in the mirror well enough. So I figured me and Dolores were a good match, and the rest was history. But what a history. See, although I couldn't take my eyes off her, I knew Dolores was off limits. Figured she was Mr. Mike's gal. Or at the very least, I'd be a sucker to mess with any of his people without a specific invite, and maybe even then. So I kept a real wide orbit between me and the girl while worshipping from afar. We had just finished the Christmas Eve show, the last matinee before putting the big holiday review to bed and closing for the week. Some of the kids from the show and I ran down to the village to kick up our heels and see what old Vinny was up to these days. I walk in, and right away I see Dolores and Mr. Mike at a table with a couple of other cats I'd seen around before. I ignored them and went and got us a table and ordered drinks, slapped Vinny on the back and said our happy holidays and all that. But then, of course, I'm spotted.
Hey, Kay, get over here. What are you playing such a cold fish for? Say hi to Dolores and meet some friends of mine.
Mr. Mike bellowed, jerking his thumb towards an empty seat at his table. Just my bum luck. I'd been giving Mr. Mike the slip the whole time I'd been playing at Lulu's, but this was bound to happen sooner or later. I just hoped it'd be over quick and I could slip out of his mitts and get back to my pals and then amscray for greener pastures. Hey, how's it going, Dolores? I mumbled with a smile and a nod at the other 2 jokers. Names were hastily exchanged. Mr. Mike whispered something into Dolores' ear, and the next thing I know, she's in my arms and we're caught up in the tide of the dance floor. I shook my head. I hadn't even had a drink, but my head was kind of fuzzy. Maybe it was the nearness of the heat of the woman I'd been mooning over pressed against me, her eyes locked on mine. And what eyes they were. Green like I'd never seen, dark and fluid like deep seawater. I was snared like a fly in the web of those eyes and didn't care if this was my last minute on Earth.
Let's get out of here, Johnny. What do you say, huh? There's a little place I know that's quiet. We can talk. And they got absinthe for the regulars.
She cooed in my ear. We hopped in a cab headed uptown, and I felt her hand electric, soft, and warm. Her fingers entwined in mine and synced up like there was just one heartbeat between us. I was thinking that we should maybe skip the absinthe, cut through the chase, and head straight to her pad. I guess that's what happened, because we pulled up in front of a big high-rise address on 5th Avenue where I figured we were making for another party. But the doorman tipped his hat and said, "Good evening, miss." But I didn't catch the last name. We walked through a vast marble lobby that could probably hold 100 or more, then took the elevator for what seemed like an eternity. Dolores fished a key out of her purse, and we were inside in no time. Off came the furs that landed in a heap on a plush round sofa. The high heels were tossed aside, and drinks were in hand from a nice bar set up in the corner. This your place?" I asked, taking it all in and whistling. The windows were floor to ceiling, and the marble floor was split level with a full grand piano on the riser. Manhattan lay out naked before us like a carpet made of stars.
Yeah, Johnny, you like it?
She purred as we started to slow dance to some crooner whose voice seemed to magically appear out of nowhere. "Do I?" I croaked. "It's first class. You live here alone?" I was wondering if some roommate, or worse, some husband might be lurking down the hall. Or maybe Mr. Mike might be the leaseholder on the joint.
Yeah, Johnny, the place belonged to my mother. She's gone, so it's all mine now. But enough of that. Let me show you the bedroom. I've been dying to show you my bedroom,"
she said, grabbing a bottle and a couple of glasses from the bar. We slid into a bedroom that was straight out of one of those town and country magazines and was bigger than 5 of my own dump. I didn't have long to take in the sights before she pulled me onto the bed, and then everything went sideways. She was all over me, arms, legs, hot hungry lips, and I swear I melted into her and spread out all over the bed in a flood of limbs and kisses that took me places I never knew existed. I wondered if maybe she'd slip me a Mickey or something, but I wasn't in any condition to do anything about it if she had, so I just lay there, floating in the delight that was her flesh. It seemed to go on like that for hours and hours, the velvet kisses still clinging to me, pouring over me as I faded into the land of Nod, while a flood of images chilled my guts and crawled over my flesh, and I screamed like to wake the dead. I could tell we weren't alone anymore, and I tried to sit up. "What the hell?" I croaked. I wanted the hell out of there, but like I say, I was gone, and whatever was gonna happen that I should be worrying about probably already had. The last thing I heard was laughter, but nobody was having any fun. I came to with the sun burning a hole in my forehead, and I groaned, having no damn idea where I was. Then I remembered. I was still at Dolores' pad. "Dolores!" I bellowed, and then fell back into the pillows. Nobody answered, and then the wave of memories crawled back, and I jumped up and got dressed. There was a note on the nightstand. "Hey, baby, we had quite a night. You were still asleep, so I went down to the club. I'll make good with everybody, don't you worry, though. Dolores will be back soon and take real good care of you." "Yeah, right," I snarled. Whatever was up with this broad, it wasn't natural, and I wanted no damn part of it. I got a cab back to my digs, showered, and just fell back into some kind of stupor on the bed. When I came to, it was dark, 8 o'clock or so. Through the fog between my ears, I thought everything true. I had to go to the club, no two ways about that. I still had a job to do, bread to win, the rent to pay, even if I did want to put 1,000,000 miles between me and Dolores. When I got to the club, the band was tuning up, without me. I got my horn and took my place, nobody acting the wiser. And then I spotted Dolores up at the bar, chatting up one of the regulars. She spotted me and I grimaced, but she ran up to me all hugs and kisses like nothing was up. I must have felt like a cold fish in her arms when I tried to slither away, but if she noticed, she never let on.
Hey, baby. I'm so glad you're here. I was worried about you, Johnny.
She cooed. Yeah, I'm all right. Just a bit hungover. Let's get to work, I muttered, and she played along. But that was it. That was the end. I was quits with Dolores. Or so I thought. But then, when do we ever get off that easy, you know? It wasn't 3 days later, I swear, when one of the gals from the show came running up to me one afternoon before I even got my coat off, throwing her arms around me, hugging me, and giggling like a kid on her birthday.
Ain't it swell about Dolores, Johnny?
She beamed and gave me another smack on the cheek. What's up, doll? I asked, tossing my coat onto a chair.
Don't play dumb, Johnny. Everybody knows, and we all think it's just great. We didn't even know you two kids were an item.
Everybody knows what? I asked, truly dumbfounded. And we ain't.
Johnny, you're gonna be a daddy. Dolores told us. Ain't it grand?
She said, then peeled off me and disappeared backstage. I just sat there. No, not possible. I mean, we'd only been friendly that one time and, yeah, sure, it was a hell of a time, but I'm pretty sure things don't work that fast. I wondered what Dolores was up to and figured she was just looking for a daddy for some little junior she had already been percolating. Couldn't blame a gal. No, of course not. But I wasn't him, even if we'd ever got off the ground as any kind of pansy-wansy. But then Dolores shows up and it looks like she's about to pop. She's so big in the family way. It was then everything went haywire, and I thought maybe the old ticker was giving out. The room started spinning as if I was on a bender. If I hadn't already been sitting down, I'd have done a nosedive for the floor. Something wasn't right, and it was a whole lot more than Dolores turning up preggers. Then suddenly there was Mr. Mike beaming like a torch and hugging Dolores, kissing her on the forehead, and making all nice while the girls fluttered around like a bunch of hummingbirds. Dolores finally turned and looked at me and winked.
Hey, baby,
she cried, racing up to me and dragging me to my feet like I was a rag doll. All I could do was stand there, something like a grin plastered across my face, but sure as hell not feeling any of it inside. Dolores turns up ready to pop from one day to the next, and nobody says nothing.
Hey, Johnny, you got a call!
Hutch the bartender yelled, holding up the receiver. I was glad for the salvation and squeezed my way over to the phone. Yeah, this is Johnny, I yelled into the phone. The guys had started warming up and it was all I could do to hear whoever was calling.
Johnny, it's Ray, Skitch's brother. You remember up at the Peacock?
The voice rang wild with urgency through the line. Hell yeah, hey Ray, how's it going? I was gonna, but he cut me off.
Can it, Johnny? You gotta listen to me. Get your hiney up here as soon as you finish up tonight. No ifs and ands, just do it. I should have said something before, but in the shock of losing Skitch, I sort of went crazy for a while. You gotta come, hear me, okay? Tonight, there's something you gotta know about Dolores.
He finished and I could tell he was out of breath.
I know I should have said something. I know. I'm real sorry, pal. Will you come?
Yeah, sure, Ray. Then the line went dead. Something about Dolores. Okay, I could beat a path up to the Peacock all right. The rest of the night was a blur, and then I was barreling along the 6 Express up to 125th and through the door, and headed backstage when Ray grabbed me by the arm and dragged me back out into the street. He didn't say a word, and a few minutes later we were sitting in a booth in Big Daddy's, a hideous little dive in an alley near the Peacock that I wasn't even sure was legal. But what it lacked in other amenities, it was discreet. And you only got in if you was friends of Big Daddy, and they never watered the booze. Okay, Ray, what gives? I asked, slamming back a highball.
Goddamn, Johnny. I don't know what I was thinking, you know, after Skitch's death and all.
He began, shaking his head and looking around toward the ceiling. Just spit it out, will ya? What about Dolores? I demanded, but he just looked at me for too long.
Okay, back when Dolores and Skitch were kind of a hot item, he started.
Hey. What are you talking about? When was Skitch cozy with her? No, man. No. None of us ever met her before. I choked out, and it was his turn to cut me off.
Johnny, shut up, man, and listen. You gotta hear me out. This is serious, man.
He tossed back his second jigger of old granddad and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Okay, I said, trying to calm him down, knowing there must be some sort of mix-up.
So sure, Skitch only went out with Dolores a short time, but Johnny, I knew that bird was trouble. But what could I do? My brother was a grown man. He had to keep his own business to himself like we all do. But when he came up here that one night saying he and Dolores was true, man, I breathed a sigh of relief. But I could tell, man, he was scared shitless. Ray wasn't afraid of nothing, and he was scared shitless. I smelled trouble all over that broad from the very start. He told me there was something not right with her, and we was going to check on it the next day. Said he had found some clinic where Dolores stashed her babies. Yeah, you heard that right. Seems Dolores was a regular baby mill. Though you'd never know to look at her, kept them all stashed in some sort of home up in Poughkeepsie. That's where Sketch went the day before he killed himself. You and him were coming up here that night, and he was going to tell me what he found out, I guess. I guess he just couldn't hold out that long.
Ray muttered off and squeezed his eyes, and I knew he was trying to hide the waterworks.
That is if they didn't somehow put the hex on him and murder him,
he added, wide-eyed and looking at me, waiting for me to say something. Okay, I got all that. But I'm telling you, Ray, I never met no Dolores that Sketch was making time with. All I remember was that Rican girl, Maria, and then Shelley for a while. And then the rest of the time he was just... Ray cut me off by shoving a picture across the table in front of me, then another, and then a third. They were all of me, Ray, Sketch, and some gal. Thing was, I'd never seen the girl before, never in a million years, and yet there we all were, grinning like kids in a booth at El Morocco, and a couple of us at the Peacock. Thing was, though, I'd never even been to El Morocco either, and I sure knew I never drank that much that I'd forget where I'd been. No, sir. So what's this? Who's the dame? I asked, but Ray just looked at me like I'd lost my marbles.
Who's the dame? Johnny, that's Dolores. You know, Mr. Mike's niece. The girl you've been running with.
His mouth was hanging almost as far as mine was. I just stared at the girl in the picture, a curvy little blonde in a tight satin dress. Ray, that ain't Dolores, I snorted, snapping the picture with the nail of my middle finger.
Knock off the shit, Johnny.
But this time I cut him off. This gal is white, Ray. My Dolores, or the Dolores I know, is smooth mocha. And a good head and a half taller than this broad. I'm telling you, man, I've never laid eyes on this girl. But how come we're all in the picture together?
You're finally wising up, ain't you, Johnny? I'm telling you something big is going on and it just ain't right. I'm telling you, she's got the juju on her. I can smell it. But Skitch, he wasn't born with the sense like I was, so by the time he caught on, it was too late. And that's why I had to tell you, Johnny.
But you're still not getting this thing square, Ray. That's not anybody I know. I felt like I was talking to an idiot. The two of us talking in two directions and never meeting in the middle.
That's what I'm saying. Things don't fit right in the world around Dolores, or Mr. Mike either, in case you haven't noticed. The two of them look different to each person who sees them. And the thing is, nobody notices that either. Your Dolores is a spade chick, right?
And I nodded.
And so is Mr. Mike?
Yeah, I said, slowly getting up to speed and wishing to hell I could slam on the brakes.
Well, Skitch's Dolores was the girl you see in the picture, and Mr. Mike, he's like some plantation joker out of some bad movie. But he's a white man, I tell you, and some of the other girls have seen different people even than that, and nobody notices. So spit it out. What's with you and your Dolores?
Ray demanded. Well, not a whole lot. That is until just a few days ago. I took a shine to Dolores right away, but didn't want to brush shoulders with anybody hooked up with Mr. Mike. I never knew she was his niece, but the day before we shut the show for the holidays, I ran into him at Vinny's, and before I knew it, she and I were dusting up the floor. And there was me, thinking it was a dream come true. But then...
Yeah, Johnny, what then? Give it to me. I want to hear all of it.
So then we ended up at her place, real swank pad on 5th Avenue. Now what happened inside all night long was the usual affair, except that I started drifting off for a minute like some part of me didn't want to say what had really happened. Knowing I could never square it anyway, and if I did, he would just think I was loopy. Except that everything slid sideways, see? And I started hallucinating, it must have been. Some weird shit, but he cut me off.
That was no hallucinating. But go on.
I saw stuff out of nightmares, and it looked like some of them were wearing Dolores's face. And sometimes she was wearing their faces. And one thing I know for sure, we weren't alone. I thought maybe she had slipped me a Mickey, but it wasn't like that. I was clear, Ray. You gotta believe me. We'd been drinking, but, well, not that much. I passed out, woke up the next morning, she was gone. And I was glad because I knew I was through with her. But I still had to get to the club. She was there, acting like it was all business as usual. Then today, just 2 days later, all the girls in the show were buzzing around about her and me being in the family way, but you and me both know it don't happen that fast. It was just that one time, you know? No, sir, doesn't happen that fast. I thought she might have been trying to fix me up with somebody else's kid, but that didn't feel right either. I got a touch of the juju sense myself, and it was firing off like the 4th of July. So what do we know? What the hell do we do? I asked, glad somebody else was in it.
Well, I know Skitch went up to some clinic in Poughkeepsie, and whatever he saw up there made him kill himself. Or made somebody else kill him to keep his mouth shut. So what do you think we should do, Johnny, old man?
He stared at me, waiting for me to state the obvious. So I did. We head up to Poughkeepsie, of course. You know exactly where the place is? I asked.
As it just so happens, I do. Skitch described it to me. It's one of those rundown old mansions out in the woods with a long driveway. We can park somewhere and sneak in after dark. You got heat?
Course I do.
Then we're all set. For Skitch and for you, Johnny. Pulling your hiney out of the fire while you're still squirming.
We made our plans to head upstate the next day, and by all indications, it was gonna be war. Poughkeepsie. Ray showed up the next morning in some old wreck of a jalopy that looked like it'd never make it all the way to Poughkeepsie.
Have some faith,
Ray replied when I spoke my mind.
This is my Auntie Macy's car, and she keeps it in tip-top condition. It's just old. Now let's hit the road,
he said, banging his fist on the driver's side door, and all I could do was jump in. It was a good 3-hour drive up to Poughkeepsie, and another half-hour of driving around back roads before we found what passed for a hospital hidden in the woods outside of town. The place was one of those crumbling old mansions that swells of New York society built in the end of the last century, cast with names like Carnegie, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and that Ford fella, the one who'd built this rust bucket that carried our asses up here, knock on wood, in one piece. This time of year, there wasn't a leaf in sight except on the ground, and the whole place was a sea of naked trees, so we couldn't get that close before dark without somebody spotting us. We ditched the car and crept from tree to tree as close as we dared get. The place was a massive stone facade, 3 stories and a top floor. We took in the scene from where we were hiding low on the ground, and I glanced at Ray. You see anything funny about this place?
Hell no, I ain't laughing, and this joint gives me the whim-whams. What do you see?
Well, if this place was some kind of normal hospital, and I'm not saying it is by a long shot on an old nag, the ground floor looks okay, lights on, all that business. But the top 2 floors are all boarded up, and there's something else.
What's that?
Where's the cars?
Yeah, you're right.
Folks like this have cars, and how would they get way out here anyway? We need to get a closer look. I took up a position on the side of the building near the front, Ray bringing up the rear and watching our backs.
What are we doing now, Johnny? How long are we gonna stay like this?
Ray's voice was hushed and he had to choke out what he was saying. "I want to see who comes out of there and who goes in," I replied, never taking my eyes off the looming hulk. Ray just nodded, and I could tell he was getting more and more spooked by the minute, and I hoped to hell he didn't bolt. We had been there maybe an hour. Nobody came and went. Then I got a plan. "Ray, make your way around back. I'm gonna lay a little diversion, buy us some time. Go look for easy ways to get in, a basement maybe, or see if we could shimmy up to the upper floors. Get a look at the attic," I said, already heading for the front door of the hospital. "Well, lordy, ain't this place a peach?" I exclaimed, barreling through the front door like I owned the place, looking around, nodding and whistling. "This is a swank joint, all right, just like Cousin Frankie said it was."
"Excuse me?"
The woman in white at the front desk yelled in alarm as she jumped up and moved to give me the bum's rush, followed by a couple of burlies in white who I took to be orderlies.
You're not supposed to be in here.
They all barked at once.
"Oh, it's okay. Yeah, see, I'm looking for the best landing place for the missus, and this looks to be the place,"
I said, still gawking in wonder and playing the wide-eyed yokel.
"And don't you worry none, ma'am. I can pay. Yes, sir, you bet I can,"
I assured her, noting where the stairs were. It all looked to be in order, but that was about it. Nobody here but the woman and the two goons.
I'm sorry, we're not open to the public. This is a private hospital, by referral only. If your wife is in need of services, there are many other places for her. Or get your own doctor to refer you to us."
She panted out, clearly in a real state because I had just wandered in.
"Really, ma'am, my wife is soon to be in her way. Please, I said I can pay. Pay whatever you want. I'm a musician, see, with Fatty Arquette's outfit, and I get paid a pretty penny, don't you know?"
I kept babbling, grinning and looking around. The goon squad collided with me and shoved me towards the door.
"Please, this place would be just right for her laying in,"
I cried, my arms haymaking as they hoisted me in the air and flung me out the front door. "Where's your car, buddy?" one of them demanded.
"Oh, just my bum luck. She ran out of gas down on the main road,"
I said, still playing the dim bulb so they wouldn't get suspicious. All I hoped was that Ray had found something we could use to get inside this joint, 'cause one way or another, we were getting inside. I started meandering down the long driveway that led back to the highway, whistling and looking around like I was just taking in the sights in case anybody was watching to make sure I was headed back to the road. When I figured the coast was clear, I cut back into the woods towards the hospital, one tree at a time. It was past sundown and the lights on the ground floor were flickering out one by one, as if the place was shutting down. At least a part of it that covered as a front for whatever was really going on here. When I made my way around back, at first I didn't see Ray and was not of a mind to call out for him. I almost stumbled over his huddled form against the back wall. He grabbed me with his trembling hands like a hawk grabbing for its last meal. He pulled me down next to him and gasped out a few words.
No, not cut out for this, buddy. No, not me."
"Ray, what is it?" I whispered hard in his ear. "Get a hold of yourself, man. What did you see?" He was crying now, blinking back the tears and standing up, scrambling away from me like he didn't know who I was, but I pulled him back down. He was scared out of his mind like a kid about to get a licking. "What is it?" I demanded, gripping his arm and shaking him to his senses.
"No, Johnny, no. Don't make me. You can't make me."
He winced, glancing up at the flank of boarded-up windows. I guessed he had made his way up there, shimmied the drain pipe or something, and gotten a good look at what was inside.
"I can't do this, man. I'm sorry. It's not who I am. Not cut out for this,"
he stammered, and then bolted out of my grasp and staggered into the night and disappeared. I hoped he'd make it back to the car and have the sense to wait for me, and that nobody heard him stumbling around. So I was on my own. Well then, that was just the way I liked it. I pulled myself up onto the nearest windowsill and grasped the drain pipe and hoisted myself up. This had been my specialty as a tyke, and I was glad I still had it in me. In no time I was up to the second floor. I jimmied one of the boards loose just enough to take a look-see, and saw it was a huge open space, the whole floor. Through the gloom, I could just make out it was filled with equipment, old beds, all kinds of stuff that was probably left over from the former occupants. Onward and upward, hopefully to pay dirt that made this whole escapade worth it, and shed some light on the weird hijinks with Dolores, and maybe even Mr. Mike thrown in for kicks. He and the dame were thick as thieves, and no way I saw clear he wasn't involved. And it still gave me the shivs to think of that night. And now she turned up in a family way. No way that was possible from any of my doing. At the 3rd floor, it was easier to jimmy loose one of the boards off a window. When my eyes got used to the pale light that filled the room, I got an eyeful and almost fell off my perch. Again, the floor was just one big wide open space, but unlike the junk and clutter of the 2nd floor, this one was laid out in rows of what looked like large see-through glass bathtubs, full of greenish water like you'd see at the bottom of some swimming pool abandoned and long gone wild. The water was cloudy and there were things floating in it. Couldn't make out what it was, though. But what was even crazier was there was a woman in each one of them, leaning against the slope back of the tub like they were asleep. Before long, a nurse came through, passing out little glasses of something to each one of them, and they tossed them off without a peep. Then they laid back and shut their eyes, all except one, who turned right at me and grinned. It was Dolores. Then she too just lay there soaking in whatever filled those tubs. That's when I noticed furtive movement in the green waters and figured Dolores moved her legs. But no, there was a frantic splashing around in the brackish stew that sloshed over the sides and clung to the tub's rim before dripping onto the floor in a gelatinous ooze. I gagged and almost turned away from the horrid scene, but quickly came to my senses when I saw something thrashing up against the side of the pool. It looked me dead in the eyes, then disappeared back into the greenish muck. Taking a closer look at all the other glass tubs, there was the same splashing around movement through the waters. I gagged again and couldn't stop the bile from drooling from between my lips. And the smell! Like seawater gone sour, and all of what should have been alive in it gone rotted. The thing's face was vile, a putrid grinning nightmare come to life. The same face I saw now in all the tubs, and the women smiling and paying no never mind like it was all the most normal thing in the world. But those faces! Small bumpy foreheads, big pulsing mouths like a cross between a fish and a toad, and those eyes, oh sweet mother, those goddamned eyes. Big lidless eyes that never blinked. It was all I could do not to scream. But the things in the tanks were getting real agitated now, and soon a couple of nurses came along with none other than Mr. Mike and took the things out of the tanks, wrapped them up in blankets and then carried them away like they were nothing but a bunch of ordinary tykes just coming to this world, proud as can be. On the chance that Dolores had blown the whistle on me, I shimmied back down the drain pipe as fast as I could and disappeared deeper into the woods where I planned to hightail it back to the highway and retrieve the car where I hoped Ray was waiting for me. I'd seen enough to know this was some high juju that was outside my league. Then I heard a scream that came from the clinic, and I knew poor Ray hadn't made it back to the car. So I doubled back to see where he got to, and if I could break him out. The ground floor of the place was dark and locked up tight as a drum, so I got my ass back up to the 2nd floor on that drain pipe that promised to collapse on me sooner than later, but I had to try. And there was Ray, trussed up on a table in some kind of operating room. And what they were doing to him, well, Ray was past needing any saving by me or anybody else. Those things from the tank were feeding on him like he was a bitch dog, and they were his pups, like leeches. Only what they were feeding on was a whole lot darker than any mother's milk. The sounds of the slurping and the chewing,
The splashing and the plopping onto the floor when they couldn't take down any more made me spill the contents of my lunch down my trousers. Then I jumped back down to the ground and ran like hell. I didn't get too far before my conscience got the better of me, and I had to turn back. I knew Ray was a goner, but I had to see what they were planning on next now that it was clear that they knew somebody was onto them. I hid in the trees where I could watch the front of the place, and pretty soon a flank of cars with their headlights off pulled up, and everybody flooded out of the hospital. Nurses, what looked like a couple of doctors, the bruisers, and some women all piled into the idling cars and took off. There was a big old ambulance too, where they loaded a bunch of bundles into the back of it that I knew were whatever they were calling babies. Then they all disappeared into the night, leaving just one car out front. And there he was. It was Mr. Mike, all right, tux in a top hat like he was about to parade through the doors of the Stork Club on New Year's Eve. He dragged some cans from around the side of the place and started tossing them through the windows of the old mansion. Then he disappeared inside for a few minutes. When he came out, he was running like the devil himself was on his ass. Then the windows of the top floor exploded, and a rain of broken glass and putrid water and slop came raining down, the slimy brackish ooze pouring over me. I had no time to worry about that, and I hoped that where I had hid the car wasn't where anybody could see it, especially Mr. Mike. He knew I was onto it, sure he did, but I was hoping his desire to make a getaway was stronger than his desire to settle any scores he had with the likes of me. I thought briefly about the few bundles the nurses had made away with, and how many more of those things were still flopping around in those tubs upstairs when the place blew. They had been abandoned, and I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it, but figured it was a good thing they didn't make it out alive. Then I thought about Dolores. Had she been in one of those cars? I thought about her bundle and decided I didn't want to ponder about it too much. Whatever's made it out of juju stays in juju, and I wasn't about to think of it as any kin of mine. That was 5 years ago now. I never set foot back in New York after that, and have pretty much kept to the road. Some things, once you know them, there's no going back, not ever, and they sort of just set the stage for whatever comes after it. I hooked up with a couple of buddies of mine from back when I was a kid in New Orleans, guys who knew stuff outside the normal, that weird shit, and we sort of formed a cabal of sorts, and they're teaching me things. We traveled the back roads in the quiet little towns along the coast people have mostly forgot about, places all the new highways leave behind to grow dusty, places where nobody ever moves to from anywhere else. That's where you'll find them mostly. They hide at first, but stick around for a day or two and you'll start to see them. Of that you can be damn sure. They don't like to be seen when strangers come around, folks who've lost their way or can't find the road they're looking for. But then they'll come out eventually like nobody's business and big as life. They're easy to spot too. That mottled skin, those mouths just too damn big for their faces, lips always pulsing. And those eyes, those huge, lidless, unblinking goddamned eyes. That's the real giveaway for sure. That and the fact that they're always covered up head to toe in coats and hats, and even gloves on even the hottest summer days. Yeah, they're real easy to spot. And when we come across a nest of them, we put them down straight away, and then move on to the next. Do we get them all? Hell no. But they know we're on to them, and they're on their guard. As for Dolores and the other broads like her, and there has to be a lot of them who didn't look like anything out of the ordinary, I figured there was nothing we could do about them. As long as we took out as much of the spawn as we could, we figured we were doing the good work for somebody. We just followed the newspapers. Whenever we saw some young cat had committed suicide under strange circumstances, that's where we headed for, figuring that was as good a place as any to start looking. Most of the time, somewhere near there, some dusty little town or hamlet that looks like it hasn't seen a newspaper in better than 100 years, that's right where we usually find a nest of them. And then, well,
We do whatever needs doing.
Chilling tales for dark nights.